What did you want to be when you grew up? What were your dream ambitions for your life? Maybe you're thinking, and maybe you're in 50s, 60s, and you're like, I'm still wondering. I still have I'm not quite grown up yet. I still have these dreams that are out ahead of me. Or maybe you're thinking, I don't know quite what that is. Sometimes we might even phrase it differently. What am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? These questions can even come up when we're looking to make a transition, or we're at a moment of our life, or what's the next steps for me? How do I faithfully live according to who I am for the Lord? As we've looked at this series called Living All of Life for Jesus, we've raised several questions throughout the series. We've addressed the specific area of our calling as work, but we've also addressed other areas that we're called to, such as calling in the home, calling to the local church, calling as citizen. And today, in particular, we want to address kind of two remaining questions. Perhaps there's 100 remaining questions. That's good as well, because you can dive in personally with those. But really want to focus on two kind of remaining areas. How do we know what to pursue? How do we find particularly our work calling? So we'll look at that question. And also, how do we balance all the things that God has called us to? How do we really live all of life for God when there's so many things and it feels like there's so many plates that we have spinning at the same time? How do we work this out? And so my goal today is this morning really as we conclude this series is to think about and wrestle with these two questions. And really it's getting at Ephesians 2:10. This call that we have, that we are the workmanship, God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. And throughout this series, I hope you've seen how our callings can be avenues for these good works that God has prepared. It extends beyond, in the workplace, it extends beyond even evangelizing our coworkers, as important as that is. It's understanding that doing work itself is good and benefits our neighbor. The Christian also does work in faith, knowing that God is at work in and through our ordinary callings. Throughout this series, we have shown that these good works, how we live for God, come in various forms. But again, we might still think, well, what does that look like for me? What does that look like for my life? And perhaps, again, you're at that crossroads, or you know somebody is at that crossroads of how do I find that for me? And you see, some callings are given. You are married or you're not married. You have kids or you don't have kids. Some of these are a given. Other ones we pursue. Right? Will you take this job or not? What will you pursue? And so that's the first question we're going to look at as we think about living for Christ, particularly as we focus again on the area and the specific sphere of work. Again, this image, we are called by Christ, to Christ, for Christ in all of life. And how that works out is through these various callings of work, church, home, and as citizen that we've been talking about. But first, live life for Jesus. Live for Jesus as you find your calling. We're going to look at this in two ways: the non-negotiables and the nice but not necessary. The non-negotiables and the nice but not necessary. And I'm pulling a lot from Sebastian Traeger and Greg Gilbert's book, The Gospel at Work, for this section, but I think they do a great job of unpacking this. So think about this, and sometimes when we think about what am I going to do, how am I going to find my calling, the first thing we might think about is like, what do I want to do? What do I think would be fun? What do I think I'd enjoy? But that's maybe a question for down the road, because I think there's other non-negotiable questions that we should be asking first. First, is it lawful? Is it lawful? Right? Think about that. I would really enjoy to rob banks. Well, no, all right? That is not a lawful Christian calling. All right, you might desire that, but no, that's out of bounds. All right, you can cross that one off the list. All right, is it lawful? We've said throughout the series that all lawful callings, we can glorify God and serve our neighbor. But of course, that presumes that it's a lawful calling. And so maybe just a quick one, is it lawful? Right. The second, does it allow me to live a godly life? This is associated with the first one. But think about this in terms of 1 Peter, which we read a couple weeks ago. 1 Peter 1, 14 to 17. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct. Since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on him as Father who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. He who called you. Right? We talk about this ultimate call of God, and the ultimate call of God means we're living for God. And part of what it means to live for God is to live holy lives, live lives in accordance with his word. And so as we think about that in terms of our, jumping ahead a little bit, as we think about that in terms of our specific callings, we should ask various follow-up questions related to this. Will it mean unfaithfulness in other areas of life? Will pursuing this specific calling, will that mean unfaithfulness in other areas of our lives? There are some things that we're good at that we might want to pursue, but it'll rob us from other responsibilities. Are you able to be faithful in your other callings if you pursue this job? I mentioned before that I knew somebody that was working their way up in the ranks as kind of an assistant coach in various kind of the lower divisions of college athletics, and they were pouring themselves into this, and they saw others who were also coaching, and those who were also coaching, friends of theirs, and even those who were higher up than them, and they said, I see what this is doing to this person's family. Because this person's so poured into, they love this sport so much, they want to succeed so much that it's ruining their marriage. And they said, I know my own personal, like my own personality, my own passions. If I continue in this is going to be me too. Now that does not mean that coach is off limits for Christians, but that meant for him, if I pursue this, I know that's because of my personality, this is going to be all-consuming, and this will end up jeopardizing my family. And again, this is not black and white, it's wisdom. Right? And so he said, I know for me that would be too much. It would mean unfaithfulness in other areas. I do want to be married one day, and that wouldn't work. Both those things wouldn't work for me. I also think, would this job cause you to sin? It's the idea of compromising biblical morality in order to do well in a career field. Some jobs, as we said earlier on, that often certain vocations have with them certain protections against sin, this is Kuyper, and certain temptations toward sin. And so some of us will be able to navigate that, and others are like, I can't handle those kind of things. It would cause me to sin. Just because there's temptations doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue something. It's part of what it means to work in a fallen world. There's always going to be temptations. But if we know ourselves to be weak in certain areas or more prone to cave to specific temptations, it may be better to pass on that than fall into temptation. Or the teaching of Jesus, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Right? If a job is going to cause you to sin, if this career path is going to cause you to sin, it's better not to pursue. This is very counter-cultural today. But again, it's living as Christ of Lord overall. A good example of this is Burke Parsons. He's the pastor at the late R.C. Sproul's church. He's now taken the pulpit where R.C. Sproul was, but earlier in his life, he had an opportunity. He had an opportunity. People approached him and said, hey, we want you to be part of this new boy band that's forming. And here's the story. All of you guys, so they're selecting these boys who are talented, and they said, all of you guys met somewhere when you were younger. You grew up together. And this is the story that you're going to tell because it'll sell better, right? Just guys that came together and they made it big. And so this is the story that you're going to tell others, and you're going to perform in this band. And initially, he did. And he's performing, and they're doing well. And then it started to gnaw a little bit on his conscience, saying, can I do this? And he was seeking counsel from others. And some of his friends, others, and said, yeah, you should. Do this. Maybe God's opening this door for you so that you can have a tremendous voice for Jesus. And he's getting counsel from others. They're saying, if you have to compromise, if you have to sin in order to get in the door, can you really do that? He writes this. Many of the Christian friends and adults around me said it seemed like the door that God had opened for me. Herein lies the danger of open door theology, he says. Just because a door is seemingly open doesn't mean that we should walk through it, and just because a door is seemingly closed doesn't mean that we shouldn't knock it down and walk through it. Their reasoning, almost persuasive, went like this. If God had really called me to ministry, and if God had given me certain talents, and if God had opened this door to a potentially worldwide audience, then God must want me to do it. It was an open door. Why not do it? The advice from many Christian men and women, many seemingly excited and jealous for my opportunity, was to go into it and see if I could be a sort of voice for God in the world of the entertainment industry. Of course, all my friends thought it was just cool, and I'd be crazy not to do it. Right? Again, there's that tension, right? It doesn't mean entertainment industry, doesn't mean that's not off limits, but for him in this moment, it's like, I can't do that. It's compromise even to get into the door is basing on a lie. And so he was not part of the Backstreet Boys, all right? But that was Burke Parsons and him kind of refusing to walk in that path because he said, I just can't do that in good conscience. To do so would cause me to sin, to lie, and I can't do that and say I'm being faithful to Jesus. Does it allow me to live a godly life? Perhaps a far-fetched example there. Not many have an opportunity to do that. But maybe in your career field, in what you want to pursue, some of that's baked in a little bit. You might be prone to certain things, and to consider that as you consider the field. Another question to think about in terms of this is, are there godly, solid churches in the area? And perhaps this is us, maybe as we're transitioning or taking a call to a particular workplace. One thing that we might not consider is, are there churches where I can faithfully worship Jesus? We might think, well, it's near the beach. That's awesome. We might think about the weather, different things in the area, but do we think, well, I can be faithful to the Lord in this? There's some areas of the country that are blessed with many faithful churches and others that don't have as many, or other countries that don't have as many. And so to think through that. As we said last week, one of the calls for the Christian is to assemble together, is to be with other Christians, is to faithfully worship the Lord. We are nourished and enriched as we do that. We can also ask, does it provide for my needs and allow me to bless others? 1 Timothy 5:8 discusses the importance of working to provide. And Paul writes, "But if anyone does not provide for themselves and for his relatives, especially for the members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." So there is a sense where providing physical needs is important. Or it might mean not, before we consider this isn't the ideal fit, this is what I want to do, to say this is what I don't want to do this as much as that, but this will help me provide for my family. An example of this perhaps is knowing a couple where the husband felt called into a particular field, but it didn't pay anything. And so his wife had to work 3 jobs to make ends meet so that he could do what he thought he needed to do. Exhausting her because he had opportunity, but he didn't want to pursue those things. And so being faithful to Lord as we assess this, and one is, can it meet needs? The second category we think through as we're assessing this is the nice but not necessary. The nice but not necessary. First, does it take advantage of my gifts and talents? When we consider this question, it's appropriate to think of our specific abilities or talents. God has designed each of us differently. We have strengths and weaknesses. There's some things that are just out of bounds because of the first 3 questions. There are other things that don't make sense because of how God has made us. If you're 4'11", you're probably not going to be an NBA basketball player. It's just how you were designed. Maybe, but it's going to be very challenging. But even if our job doesn't align, we should pursue competence. We talked about this a few weeks ago. But we need to distinguish between competence and gifting. Competence means you're trying to get better at the job to where God has called you in that moment. You're trying to do it well. Gifting means that something comes easy to you that might not to others. While gaining competence is something we should all pursue regardless of gifting, pursuing competence within an area of giftedness happens with less effort. And God often uses this to direct us and to lead us to the next thing. Here's what I mean by that. Let me give you an example. Gene Vaith says this: a fellow college professor told me about one of his former students who could not keep his grades up. He was dedicated and determined, though, and he kept enrolling in classes, retaking those he failed and studying night and day. Finally, he realized he had to take a semester off. He took a job for the time being doing what he really enjoyed, namely working on cars. As an auto mechanic, he found himself rising the ranks in the garage, taking on more responsibilities and earning more and more money. He felt like he should go back to school, but he could not bring himself to quit his mechanic job. He was apologetic to his professor, but he should not have been. He had found his vocation. Right? Think about it like that. Often, as we're pursuing competence, as we're trying to be faithful to God in a certain area, it's just we're pulling our hair out. I can't do this. It's too hard. It's too challenging. And God can even be using that to redirect us towards something that is more fitting. If we're being lazy, perhaps on the job, we might not have those opportunities to even assess what might be more of a natural fit. And so it's God directing us, even as we don't see it, but his hand is at work in and through it all. Does it take advantage of my gifts and talents? Is it something that I want to do? Now, hopefully, when we start to work through our calling differently, we'll want to align with what God wants for us. We want to do work that brings him honor and glory. We want to do work that steers us away from temptation. We want to use our gifts if that's what God desires for us. But because of our sins, sometimes we think of our desires, what we might like best first, and the other categories don't seem to go into play. Sometimes we can even sit on our hands waiting for the perfect fit without pursuing the opportunities that God has provided right in front of us. Proverbs 12:11, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Or what about Proverbs 28:19, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. Right? Our callings are often in the hands of others. We're not called to do something until we actually are able to do it and are doing it. Think about this. This works because 90% of our church is engineers. But if I desire to be an engineer, I cannot just declare myself an engineer. Right? Multiple steps need to take place. Like we need to enter school, into which I'm dependent upon teachers for learning and for passing those examinations. I'll need to pass certain examinations. I must find employment and have somebody who is willing to hire me for that task, or be self-employed and have others who are willing to work with me or willing to buy a certain product. I can't just declare it and it's so. There's so many things that I'm dependent on in that process. In today's world of opportunities, some are more aware of how dependent we are than others. Some have easily found employment in areas that they desired, where others have struggled. And in this, I think it's important for us to consider yet another factor, that we need to, regardless of if we are able to pursue the ideal workplace scenario, we should still take care to discern our gifts and talents. To think through what has God given me that I'm strong at? What are some areas that I'm really do well? God has gifted us and equipped us as individuals uniquely. As we mature, we're able to notice and discern some of these things that we're good at, some of the things that we gravitate towards. It also happens in the company of other Christians, those who affirm different things about our lives. Then God provides opportunities to exercise and sharpen these gifts. Sometimes these opportunities give more evidence of something that we're gifted in, and other times they reveal that our discernment was kind of off. I thought I was gifted in this, but it turns out I wasn't. As we grow in our gifts, God gives wisdom to be able to use them appropriately in ways that glorify Him and work for the good of our neighbor. I bring this up because even if we're not able to work in a place that best suits our unique gifts and abilities, it's still helpful to discern them. God hasn't promised that we'll be employed directly related to our personality and gifts, but we are created to bring Him glory and to love our neighbor. Because of that, we can recognize our unique gifts can be used outside of our employment. Put it another way. God doesn't promise work that matches our gifts, but he calls us to glorify him and love others, and our gifts can serve that purpose beyond any job. Be careful of thinking this only has value, this only has meaning, this only matters if I'm doing this in a specific paid vocation. We're not promised that. But it is how God has designed us, and we can use that for the good of others, whether it's in a job or not. Second, live for Jesus as you balance your callings. This relates to the idea that it goes beyond a specific calling. It relates to this idea of every calling, and we're called to live for Jesus in all of our callings. How do we balance them all? Well, first, know your callings. 1 Corinthians 7:17, we've read this in the series already, but only let each person lead the life to which the Lord has assigned to him, to which the Lord has called him. This is my rule in all the churches. So live according to how God has called you, the situation. And in the context, talking about whether you're married or unmarried, we can relate this to other aspects as well, right there. Where God has placed you in a specific place and location. Thinking through, what am I called to do? I am objectively a husband. I am objectively a father. Right? I am a son. Right? There's obligations to others that are baked into that. I am a member, a pastor here at Blue Course Community Church. There's obligations in the midst of that call as well. So thinking through what are our callings. And then as we do that, we should distinguish between must do and can do within those callings. Can do's are things that we feel called to do, but there is much freedom in pursuing them or not. Must do is things that we need to do in order to be faithful to God in that calling. Think about this. I may be called to be my child's Little League coach, right? That can be distinguished from primary duties as father. But whether I'm holding a clipboard and blowing a whistle or not, right? I can do that and be a faithful father. I cannot do that and still be a faithful father. But I cannot neglect my children. I cannot fail to bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord and be faithful to the Lord in that calling, because those are things that He specifically called me to do in Scripture. A check for this is to ask, can I remove or change this calling and still be faithful to my ultimate calling? Can I change or remove this and still be faithful to my ultimate calling? Understanding the difference between this will help you when you're overloaded and help you know how to tweak your calling so that you can be faithful to the must-do areas of your life. The inability to distinguish between these creates an unnecessary conflict and burden. The goal is not necessarily, listen to this, to create as much margin as possible. Right? To say, what's the bare minimum I have to do? But it's to seek to be faithful. Maybe another illustration of this can be working out. In working out, there's two terms, MEV and MRV. All right, MEV. Bear with me as I nerd out a little bit. MEV and MRV. MEV is the minimum effective volume. MRV is the maximum recovery volume. Right? Minimum effective volume, maximum recovery volume. Maybe it'd be easier if you just see it, right? The minimum effective volume is the least amount of work you need to stimulate strength or muscle gains. This varies, right? Beginners need less. Those who are advanced need a little bit more to progress. The maximum recovery volume is the maximum amount of training volume that you can do and still be fully recover from, leading to gains without overtraining. This is also influenced by stress, by life factors. And so these terms are often used in terms of working out. You think about it like you're like, I need to get back in the gym. I need to work out, right? Here's a problem that most make. They say, I haven't done this in forever, but I know I used to do a lot. And so you go into the gym and you totally overdo it, and you're sore for 2 months. Right? And so you're not able to go the next day. And in fact, you don't want to really go again ever because you know next time I go, I'm going to be sore for 2 months again. Well, you've overdone it. You've gone past this maximum recovery volume. What you need to do is a little bit, and then do a little bit more, and then do a little bit more, so that you're able to recover from it. On the opposite side are those who've been training and working out for a really long time, and they're like, I'm just going to take off a month. Well, that really affects them because they've built up this need to have a certain amount of stimulus in order to maintain what they have. Why have all this? This is church on a Sunday morning. This is not, working out. You're not a trainer. I think it's a helpful analogy for us in our Christian life. Some of us can press so much, and we can just completely overdo it and burn out. And then the danger can be, I'm going to completely withdraw from everything. I'm going to do the bare minimum. But when we do that, sometimes the muscle regresses, right? Sometimes we lose the capacity to do all that we have been called to do. For others that are saying, I'm just kind of doing the bare minimum, it's like, actually, you could be doing more for the Lord. You could be doing more for others if you just keep making a little bit of progress. Right? It's not as simple as I have this many hours in the day and I'm balancing these things. Often things are done in terms of energy levels, in terms of skills developed, so that I'm able to pour into multiple areas of life at the same time. I bring this up because just anecdotally, one of the dangers that I've seen in the course of ministry is those who've burned out, those who've gone so hard, and then they kind of withdraw completely. And it just to physically see how that affects them spiritually. That yes, you were doing too much. You need to be aware of that. You need to know when to draw back. But sometimes the answer wasn't a complete withdrawal, but it was to understand and to seek to be healthy in a way that's sustainable so that you might bless others in how God has gifted you for the long term. We also, as we think about this, should be careful of a straight kind of hierarchy approach. Sometimes we kind of order our lives with God, family, church, work, or something like that. But they can often pit our callings against one another when they don't need to be. You think about taking on additional responsibilities at church, for instance, could be a way to help create a healthier church for our family and for others, to model Christian service before our kids. Or family and work. Work and providing for our family can be is a necessary thing. And so we have to be careful of not pitting them against each other when they don't. Often the better question is, what's the most important thing? What am I called to do in this specific moment? Here's an example that they often use is I treasure my family. I love my family. And if there's something severe, there's a family emergency, I'm going to drop things. I'm going to be with my family. They're important. But if I'm I've used this example before, but if I'm doing a funeral of a loved one of yours, and during the remembrances, people are giving, they're telling, hey, this is who this person was, this is what they meant to me, and I'm FaceTiming my family in the front row. That's not being faithful to God in that moment. That's not me saying, well, I just treasure my family. No, my call to God in that moment is to faithfully serve Him in the most pressing need, in that sphere, in that moment. There's other examples of people getting distracted, even by other non-calling type things in this. We just have to be careful with that. Another thing to keep in mind is keep ultimate and subordinate in their proper place. In their proper place. What does it mean to be faithful right now? There's a question that's doesn't necessarily have an easy answer. There's not a 10-step process for this is what you need to do in this specific situation. Instead, we need biblical wisdom. We need to understand what it means to be faithful in each area of our lives. In doing so, we can recognize the difference between going over and above and being faithful, and understand what it means to be bare minimum faithful in the midst of this. It's one of the reasons that Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 is better to be, that singleness can be preferred because it doesn't divide allegiances a little bit. It kind of removes certain callings so that we can press into other callings. And so one thing that we have to understand is that in the midst of this, we can have multiple callings pulling at us in different directions at the same time. But we're called to wisdom in how to evaluate this. Christian community can be helpful in this. One of the ways that we can simplify this in a negative way is simply by elevating that which is easier. Elevating that which is easier. I think about one of the things that means to be called by God is to bring order out of chaos, right? And we can say that's much easier to do in the workplace than it is at home. So I'm going to stay late at work. I'm going to get done with this project because that's just me being, pouring into my workplace. Is that, or is that you avoiding home? Right. For two people, it could be completely different. One person, in their internal motivation, it's I'm working these hours not necessarily to provide for my family, but in order to avoid my family. And for others, it can be I'm doing this to provide for our family. Again, this requires biblical wisdom. It's not easy as this or that. It's wrestling through. It's also requiring wisdom. Some spouses are saying, hey, I understand that. I want you to lean into your work. I want you to leverage what you're able to do and those gifts there, and I'll take care of home. I'll be here so that you can be leveraged over there. And others are saying, I need you home. Again, these are conversations to have among families, and that's going to look different in different situations. One thing that we need to note as we think about this is that our primary calling always guides and directs our secondary callings. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. Now think about that. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving Christ. As we think about all these areas, we're thinking about areas of wisdom, of knowledge that we can apply to the situation. But there's more than just knowledge in the situation. There's communion with God in the midst of this. As we think about what we should do in a calling, as we think about how to balance these callings, it's not just processing through some of the things that we said, but it's a life spent in prayer, in love towards God. in communion with the God who made us, who cares for us, who's called us to all the various things that we have right now. And it's entering in with prayer and saying, God, how do I be faithful to you in this moment? Help me discern this. It's inviting others to speak into our lives prayerfully as well. But what does this look like? What does faithfulness look like to the Lord in the midst of this? My obligation is to Him and Him ultimately. And I want to be faithful in all the things that He's called me. Help me. It requires humility. It requires dependence on others. Living faithfully for the Lord often means choosing what is better over what is good in a particular moment. What is the highest thing that God has called me to in this moment? It means we're not supplanting God with something subordinate, no matter how badly we want to justify it. So often we can justify our own desires. We can put something as the primary circle and use God as a justification for what we want to do, what we think is right, instead of seeing this as an avenue by which to serve Him. One of my favorite quotes relating to my particular calling for this is from Eugene Peterson. He says this: "If succeeding as a pastor means failing as a parent, you've already failed as a pastor." If succeeding as a pastor means failing as a parent, you've already failed as a pastor. We're called to faithfulness to God in each area of life, not just picking one and choosing that. All right. By Christ, to Christ, for Christ, in each of these areas of our life. We began this series with two different approaches to calling, if you remember. I said that I saw two videos from public figures who professed faith in Jesus. The first was a sports commentator, and he said this about his calling. A guy who he's talking about a golfer, and he says this: a guy who has the chance to be Tiger Woods, maybe even Michael Jordan, was questioning what it means on the eve of a major championship that he had never won. My initial response was, rest in peace, Scottie Scheffler, as a major championship winner. He had doubted, he had questioned, and he had asked why. And I thought for a moment, done. You know me. I'm all about the GOATs being cold-blooded sports killers, being obsessed with winning to the detriment of everything else in their lives. Win or else, win or bust, win or go home to nobody. And he continued to say, this is my philosophy. I've ruined my first marriage because of this, because I was committed to this. But this is what God called me to do. And so it's worth it. This is how God has made me, and so I need to lean in. What he was doing is he was pitting his call to home against his call to work. He was really placing the main circle as work, and everything else was in service of that, even God. The second was from a Hall of Famer, in his speech that he was given as he's been inducted into the Hall of Fame. He said that if this is all he does in life, and if this is the only thing his people remember him for, and this is him being inducted in the Hall of Fame, then he has failed. He said, my wife and my daughters, they're my greatest gifts. In other words, God has given me them. Yes, I'm glad for the things I was able to achieve in the workplace, but God has called me there as well. One thing that we should recognize, even as we think and assess these callings, is there are certain callings that are objective. They're just this is just how things are, and there's other things that we feel called into. They're subjective. That we have to weigh the subjective. I feel like I'm called into this against the objective. This is I am married to Ashley. I feel called into other things, and God has confirmed that in a variety of ways. I'm going to be faithful for that. But one's more sure than the other. And to be aware of those things as well. We are called in all of these areas to bring God glory, to use them to serve our neighbor. But we have to understand the context in which Ephesians 2:10 that we started with is written in. Before Ephesians 2:10, we read this: "For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not of your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one can boast." We just said, hey, live out good works, pursue good works in all these various things that God has called you to. But listen very carefully. Pursuing these things is not what makes us right with God. We don't do these things in order to kind of merit heaven or merit a right relationship with God. But instead, it says you are saved by grace. Salvation belongs to the one who came for us. He was sent on an objective, secure calling to rescue those who have been lost, as us. So that all who place their faith and trust in Jesus and what he has come to live on this earth, to die on the cross in our place, to be raised in victory, if we place our faith in him, we will be saved. That's where our grounding comes from. We don't live these things in order to earn God's favor. But as Christians, and if you do not know Jesus, I invite you, trust in him. The invitation, the gift is made available to you. That all who have sinned are separated from God because of that sin, but Jesus has made a way back into a right relationship with God. And trust in him and live. And as we do so, then we can take up the mantle of Ephesians 2:10 and recognize this: we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. We walk and we live and we pursue Jesus in all these areas of life because we're secure in him. We know that not only has he saved us, but he's working through us in all that he's called us to do. And we do that, however imperfectly, and trusting in the grace that's already been provided for us. That even as we enter in, even as we think about, have I balanced these appropriately? Am I pursuing things I shouldn't pursue? That there's forgiveness and there's grace in the midst of all of this. And we can take joy that we are secure in that primary calling, which is more sure than any secondary calling that we have, because it's eternally secure. It is by Christ, to Christ, for Christ. He who knew you before the creation of the world will know you forever. I hope that's true of you, and if it is, let's live in light of it this week and for the rest of our lives.